Okay, there we go. That's working. Okay. We'll probably get started in about 5-10 minutes. I just need to fiddle around a little bit with the stream settings, but yep, so go to the washroom, grab a couple slices of pizza. We'll start in about 5-10 minutes. This keeps fading out in a way I don't like, and I don't know why that is the case. So I don't know if you Okay, everybody, so we are going to get started. We are a little bit smaller group today, but no problems. If I usually don't do the startup, usually Mario does this little emceeing, so bear with me. Santiago's here. He's going to tell us the case for decentralized AI policy. Pretty exciting stuff. Please stick around afterwards and ask any questions you have. If you have any questions throughout the talk, just raise your hand, and then I'll come to you with a microphone, and then you can ask them. Other than that, you will notice today there's like very lightly in the background some background music that the office is running that I can't turn off. So I'm really sorry about this in advance. But other than that, we should be good to go. I'm going to hand it off. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Hey everyone. Thank you very much for making some time for this on your Tuesday afternoon. So I guess I'll introduce myself real quick. Santiago Carvalho. I'm an undergrad student at U of T. I'm doing economics, philosophy, and policy. And today I'll be presenting about a decentralized and centralized AI regulation. Initially, when I first thought about this talk, I was going to make more of an argument towards decentralized AI regulation. But as I did more research and learned more about it, I think there's like valid points to both sides. So I think I'm taking more of a impartial stance. So here are like a few like significant figures in terms of AI regulation. I try to combine significant figures for decentralized AI regulation as well as centralized. So here closer to the right is Governor Gavin Newsom, which is the governor of California that signed the SB 53 on which is the bill for Okay, so it was a bill signed in, um, pardon me, September 29, 2025, and it has already come into act by the beginning of this year. Um, and the bill requires transparency from frontier AI labs um, under safety precautions. I'll talk more about the bill in specific in the coming slides. Next to Governor Newsom, there's Alex Boris, which is a member of the New York State Assembly. He yeah, he was the biggest sponsor for the RACE Act in New York. In the middle, we have Chris Wright, which is the head of the Department for Energy in the U.S. And under his leadership, launched he launched the Genesis mission in the U.S., which is focused on limiting regulation or limiting state regulation to promote innovation and kind of like a national security advantage in the U.S. And lastly, we have Roberta Metsola and Haja Labib, who were the two signatories of the UAI Act. So when I first started this talk, I was thinking, given the current competitive pressures or this arms race dynamics we have between China and the U.S., competing to gain a comparative advantage in terms of the efficiency or efficacy of their AI models, they've quite often compromised safety precautions, safety measures, in order to not to divert your resources in that direction. And whenever you see that situation, it's easy to want that like some sort of international overarching authority would oversee certain limits, do something to start getting the ball rolling. So yeah, and that sort of smaller scale regulation looks more like decentralized patchwork regulation, and that's what we're going to be exploring in part of this presentation. So first, I'm just going to present some examples of decentralized patchwork regulation and also centralized patchwork, non-patchwork, just centralized regulation. And then I'm going to provide like arguments for why each side is beneficial. So very remarkably, we have the California SB 53, which has just come into action. As I was telling you, it was signed in September last year and has already come to fruition. Its focus is really on transparency in frontier labs, and it classifies frontier labs as those that use about 10 to the power of 26 flops to train their models. And yeah, I mean, there's many. Okay, I'll just go through the slide, I guess. Initially in California, previously they tried to pass the SB 1047, which was a lot more ambitious in terms of like the measures they would put in place for AI regulation. However, it was vetoed by the governor, and as a consequence, we just moved forward with SB 53. It's also focused on large developers, and in this case, large developers are considered those that produce at least $500 million in annual revenues. And the focus is to like it's on transparency, allowing the public to know what protocols and those developers are taking. And there's also like I would say that's one of the key aspects of the bill, but there's also like protection of whistleblowers. So in that case, it protects employees in frontier AI labs from reporting critical, like that is like alarming situations, and it provides like robust legal defense of them, uh, and also the frontier labs are obligated to report critical safety incidents, which can look like models expressing deceptive behavior or um, compromising, like having a more, um, let's see, um, well, yeah, demonstrating deceptive behavior and also like gaining access to capabilities they're not supposed to. And they're supposed to report that within 15 days. Um, Also, like as a little side note, they also establish a call compute, which is like an initiative to provide a cloud, like open cloud compute, uh, with the purpose of democratizing AI development. And so that's the California SB 53. The New York RAISE Act is a lot more recent. It was only signed at the end of last year, but it will only come in effect by the start of 2027. Uh, just like the SB 53, it's focused on large developers, which are categorized as developers that produce more than 500 million in annual revenue. It's a little bit more strict than the California SB 53 in terms of the reporting of critical safety incidents, because the California one only allows for, gives up to 15 days, while the RAISE Act demands reporting within 3 days. And it also has a focus on critical harms such as bioweapons, cyber attacks. So that's it for examples of decentralized AI regulation. Um, Now looking more into examples of centralized AI regulation, you have the EU Act, which has been a very comprehensive formal act just because it looks over multiple jurisdictions, but it has also has been a lot more gradual in its development and also implementation. Um, and here I put a little chronology of year by year the new upgrades in requirements. So when it first started, it just had bans on unacceptable risks, but as the year progresses, now it's gonna well, actually, so the rules on by the way, would you guys want me to detail what each one of these categories mean, like high risk, unacceptable risks, or okay? So, um, okay, just give me a second. Okay, so unacceptable risks is like things that we don't want to allow at all. So some aspects that could compromise democracy, things like social scoring done by government. So since the bill first came into effect, they banned those. But the other ones, they kind of left some more wiggle room to allow AI companies and developers to adapt to those new regulations. We have high risks, which will come into effect, like rules on high risks that will come into effect later this year, and they entail like risks, like implement applications of AI in like key areas, whether it's like infrastructure, education, or employment. But actually, there's some like pushback on that right now, as of early this year, and there's some parties trying to push those regulations for 2027. And yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that with the EU AI Act. Something I think it's worth remarking is that's a form of regulation with a lot more teeth. It has it charges 35 million euros, or 7% of global annual revenues, to AI acts that violate their standards, and they choose like whichever is higher. And it's worth comparing that with what we had for New York, in which penalties like initially looked only 1 million for infractions, and after a first offense, it was like it went up to 3 million. And then I also wanted to comment on the U.S. federal government attitude to the to AI regulation. It has been very focused on deregulating and pushing back on previously established federal regulation. The Biden administration passed a bill on which is the Executive Order 14111, and as soon as the Trump administration came to power, they removed that and put in place the Executive Order 1479, which quite the opposite, tries to promote innovation and compromising safety protocols. There's also I might actually detail a little bit more on that. So, okay. We have the AI litigation task force, which in any case is trying to like address state laws, which, well, I guess you can easily slide into a conversation of how constitutional it is. But yeah, the Department of Justice, it's like investigating like how burdensome certain feel free to go and also the Secretary of Commerce in March this year has due a report in which they are investigating specific state laws to see if they violate the First Amendment and or hinder the Trump's administration's like national AI strategy, which okay, so just to summarize it, I feel like it was a little bit scattered. The Trump administration is trying to limit the patchwork forms of regulations, so that is like different states putting on regulation on different issues, and it's trying to limit that. And in doing so, it's trying to limit the state's ability to legislate on their own jurisdiction, based on the premise that though that patchwork of regulation disincentivizes innovation in the United States, which gives them like a comparative disadvantage when competing with other states, but in reality, China. And then on a more positive note, the Congress has been more mixed in its attitude towards AI regulation, and it has passed the Defiance Act, which relates to people's right to like legally persecute AI companies for deep fakes of their person or their image, and also the Chat Act, which is related to children's interaction with AI models. So that's it for centralized regulation, and now I'm gonna proceed by presenting arguments for why each form of regulation is beneficial. So we have for decentralized regulation, first off, we have policy sandboxes. So when you're thinking about decentralized regulations, you're thinking about smaller jurisdictions putting forward forms of regulation, and that can be beneficial because quite often the process of regulation is quite empirical, and you try things out and see if they work, and if they don't, you amend them and whatnot. But when you're doing that in a large scale, you know, the losses are greater if you like, um, if you over-regulate. Well, you affect the whole country's like capacity to innovate, and when you under-regulate, well, you expose the population to um, lack of like proper safety protocols and the subjective consequences that entails. Um, so yeah, so it's kind of like a smaller kind of environment in which you can try things out, and before, and if something really works at scale, that's something you can later expand. You also have another added benefit is that there's like lower thresholds, so it's a lot easier to pass a bill at a state level than at a national level. Quite often, like national legislature takes years, and there's like the whole like lobbying mechanisms that come into the picture. While at the state level, it's much easier to uh, gain a winning coalition and pass a bill. And the other benefit is that it's also much easier to um, implement amendments or remove regulation that doesn't work. And lastly, it is attuned to local realities, whether it's the local population ethics, what kind of um, okay. Let me just try to like ground it a little bit. Um, a certain population could feel more comfortable with AI systems talking about sexual content, while in a different part of the country, people are not as comfortable having models openly talk about those topics. So if you put in place like more like local forms of regulation, smaller jurisdictions, you can tune it to those preferences within the population. Also thinking about the presence of preferences of the population, you have the tolerance to risk, how much a particular group of people are willing to have some sort of harmful implications in favor of innovation. And lastly, different states or regions have different characteristics. Maybe, for example, I don't know, like a state like Michigan might have a larger like manufacturing industry, and then in a state like that, taking like putting in place safety precautions for how humanoid robots, powered by AI or LLMs in their interactions with humans. In a state like that, you would be a lot more interested in putting in place regulations that look after the workers' safety in that kind of environment. So those are some arguments in favor of decentralized regulation. Then some arguments in favor of centralized regulation is that when you have centralized regulation, you're actually looking at like larger jurisdictions, and in larger jurisdictions you have more economic leverage, in the sense that gaining access to your market, it's more valuable. So if you take into account like the European Union, even though they don't have any frontier labs within their borders, the fact that they can go and tell like frontier labs that, well, if you don't meet these standards, you don't have access to my markets. That has a coercive power, and at the end, even though the regulation is not international, the companies on their own are gonna corroborate or are gonna align themselves with those standards just to gain access to those markets and the economic benefits that they can find there. There's also the argument that perhaps centralized regulation is more efficient, looking into more of a economic point of view. Just having one set of regulations instead of like a patchwork, it's a lot easier to navigate for companies. It's a lot more predictable, and and then you can make a case that it's in our economic interest to just have a uniform sort of regulation. And what I found quite an interesting claim is that perhaps centralized forms of regulation are better capacitated or have more resources to address large-scale issues, particular like existential issues, um, just because they have a wider grasp and influence compared to um, lesser levels of jurisdiction. A state could pass a bill on, how people use a. But it is okay. Yeah, it's working. I mean, I think I got it to work, but I'll take the. I believe it's working. Yeah. Well, and I guess I'm pretty much wrapping up. Um, at the end of the day, there's value in both those strategies, both a decentralized and a centralized model. Um, in any case, the ideal scenario is that we get a mixed strategy. Um, i in practice, I think it's going to be a lot more viable to first take smaller steps with smaller jurisdictions, passing like decentralized forms of regulation, which in the process allows for, as I said, like experimentation and whatnot, and then eventually larger players, whether it's like the U.S. federal government or even at an international body, um, could put in place a larger regulation. And actually, I was thinking about this analogy. Quite often, like in our current position, we have a race to the bottom in which AI companies increment the capabilities of their models without putting in place appropriate safety measures. And there's like a huge gap in investment in how much they invest in development, how much they invest in safety precautions. Um, so there's a race to the bottom of sorts. But when you set in place a decentralized patchwork model of regulation, in any case, you can have a race to the top in which different jurisdictions try to like take the next step and um, increment the safety standards. And also that's something that other jurisdictions can take on. Um, so the analogy I was thinking is that uh, decentralized regulations can produce a competitive pressure to the top or higher safety standards, in contrast to what we're seeing right now. While larger jurisdictions, they set more of a floor for safety standards, like a certain point, that like, yeah, just a minimum that must be matched. But it's an open question if the standards that perhaps the U.S. government is pushing right now in a federal level is sufficient to ensure that these technologies are integrated in our society in a way that's not harmful for us as individuals, as societies, as humanity. And I think that's about it for me. I'm very happy to like do a Q&A, talk about it a little bit. Yeah, sounds good.